Welcome back to Lullaby Atlas. Tonight, we follow the gentle story of Noah. Close your eyes, let the world fall away. Before the story begins, let yourself arrive. The day is over now, there is nothing more to do. You are safe here, warm and dry and held. Tonight we shelter through a long, gentle story. An old man, a great wooden ark, a house full of quiet animals, and rain on a roof while they sleep. You need only to lie warm and rest. And if you like, before you drift, you are welcome to leave a word saying where you are listening from tonight, so many of us sheltering together as the rain begins. So let us begin quietly in the green world before the water came. The light is going slowly, the way it does in old stories. A wide green plain breathing out the warmth of the day. The grass is bending in a soft western wind. The hills in the distance holding their shapes against a sky the color of pale amber and ash. Flocks move unhurried across the lowland, white and gray shapes drifting together like slow thoughts. A lone acacia stands at the field's edge, its flat crown dark against the fading gold. This is the world as it was, very long ago, green and wide and still before the rains came. The old story comes to us from a time before cities, before roads, a time when the rivers ran clear through tall reed beds and the marshes were full of herons standing still as carved wood. Birds moved in long skeins overhead, following invisible paths between the hills. The evening air carried the smell of warm grass and river mud, and somewhere faintly, the sweetness of wild fig ripening in the heat of the day. The world in those days was large and unhurried, and the sky above it was immense, shot through now with the first pale stars. And yet, beneath the beauty of it, something in those long ago days had grown quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of something missing. The old story says gently that the world had lost its way, that a heaviness had settled over the land like cloud before rain, a sorrow that had no single face and no single name. It was not written in the hills or in the movement of the flocks. It was only felt, the way one feels a change in the weather before the first drop falls, a dullness, a distance, a forgetting of kindness. The story does not dwell there. It passes through that sorrow the way a traveler passes through a cold shadow between two sunny fields, briefly, quietly, and without looking back. For the story's heart is not in what was lost, but in what was kept. And what was kept was this: one man, one family, one household, where the fire was tended and the bread was broken and the animals were watered at the end of the day. One place in all the wide world where kindness had not gone out. The story turns toward that light and rests there. His name was Noah, and he was old in the way of the ancient world, which is to say, he had lived long enough to know the difference between what mattered and what did not. He was not a great man in the way the world measures greatness. He had no armies, no towers, no store of gold. He had a homestead of wood and mud brick on a gentle slope above the plain. He had his fields and his flocks and his tools, and he tended them all with a steady and unhurried hand. He had his family, and he was glad of them. He walked gently in the world. That is what the old story says of him, in its plainest and most beautiful way. He walked gently, and he was good. And in a time when goodness had grown rare, it shone from his household the way a lamp shines in a window at the end of a long road. Not blazing, not demanding to be seen, but steady and warm and unmistakably there. His wife knew the weight of his hand in hers, and she trusted it. His sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, had grown up watching the way he moved through his days, quietly and carefully, and they had learned from it. The homestead was a simple thing. A low house of mud-plastered walls and a roof of woven reeds, a pen for the goats and the cattle, a stone-ringed well at the yard's edge, a stand of old fig trees whose roots had found the water deep below the dry season's reach. There were clay jars of oil and grain arranged along the inner wall, woven baskets hanging from the rafters, a grinding stone worn smooth by generations of use. In the evenings, the smoke from the cooking fire rose straight up when the air was still, or bent gently westward when a wind came off the hills. In the mornings, he rose before the light and stood at the threshold and listened to the birds beginning, to the cattle stirring in their pen, to the particular silence of the hour before dawn that felt to him always like a held breath, like the world gathering itself before it spoke. He was a man who noticed things, the direction of the wind, the color of the clouds at the horizon, the way the goats moved when rain was coming. He had learned the world's small signals over a long life of paying attention, and he trusted them the way he trusted his own hands. His sons worked beside him in the fields and at the threshing floor, and in the long evenings they sat together in the courtyard while the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Their wives ground grain and wove cloth and tended the small garden at the house's south wall, where herbs grew in the shade of a mud brick ledge. The family was not wealthy, but they were whole. And wholeness in a household has a smell and a weight to it, like fresh bread in a warm room, like the particular softness of lamplight on familiar faces. It is one of the quietest and most durable of good things. The plain around them was green in the rainy season and golden in the dry, and the river at the valley's bottom ran full in spring and dropped to a gentle murmur through the summer. There were days when the whole world seemed to rest, when the heat lay quiet over the fields and the shadows under the fig trees were dark and still, and even the birds went silent in the long afternoon. On those days, Noah would sit in the shade with his back against the rough bark of the old tree and let the stillness settle over him and be content and be at peace. And then one day, in the old story, it comes quietly, as the most important things often do. A word came to Noah, not in thunder, not in fire, not in anything he could point to afterward and explain. It came the way certainty sometimes comes to those who have spent a long life paying close attention to the world, fully formed, undeniable, arriving in the stillness like a stone settling to the bottom of clear water. The one who watched over all things had spoken, and Noah, who was a man that had always listened carefully, heard. What he heard was this: that a great rain was coming, a rain longer and deeper than any the world had known, and that he was to build a great vessel to carry his family and the living creatures of the earth safely through it. Not a raft, not a boat as one might know it, something greater and stranger, a great floating house of timber, sealed against the water, roofed against the sky. A shelter, a place of keeping, and he was to build it with his own hands, here on the plain, far from any sea, while the sun still shone and the fields still lay green around him. He stood with it for a long time, the word, the weight of it, the strange and enormous task it carried. The plain was quiet around him. A single bird crossed the sky and was gone. Then he walked back to the homestead and told his wife, and she listened with her hands still and her eyes on his face. And when he had finished, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Then we had better begin." And that was that. The old story says nothing more about it. It simply says that Noah did as he had been told. He rose and he began. The first thing was the wood. Strong, resinous cypress, the kind that weeps a fragrant oil when it is cut, the kind that resists water and resists rot and carries in its grain the patience of slow growing. He went into the cypress grove on the hillside above the homestead with his sons at his side and his adze on his shoulder, and they began to fell the trees in the early morning cool when the sap was still. The smell of fresh-cut cypress filled the air like something between incense and rain, sharp and clean and alive, the smell of a tree giving up its years for a purpose it could not have known. They brought the timber down the slope on sledges of smooth-worn wood, log by log, day by day, and laid the great beams side by side in the flat ground below the homestead. The work was slow, the slowness of work that is meant to last, and they rested in the evenings with their arms aching and their hands rough and smelling of resin, eating their supper by firelight with the satisfaction of men who have spent a day doing something real. The pile of timber grew across the weeks, and the smell of cypress lay over the whole homestead like a benediction, warm and clean in the cooling night air. And then came the pitch, dark tar to seal the wood, rendered down in great clay pots over slow fires until it ran black and glistening and thick, smelling of earth and ancient resin and something deep and mineral and old. Noah learned to use it as he had learned everything in his long life, carefully, patiently, by doing it again and again until his hands knew the work. He learned the right temperature, the right thickness, the way the brush moved with it rather than against it. The pitch went on warm, and it dried hard and dark, and it made the wood impervious, sealed against the coming water, ready to carry its freight of living things. The evenings in those days had a particular quality. The golden light on the growing timber frame, the smell of pitch and cypress and wood smoke and supper all mingled together, the family moving around the worksite with the easy familiarity of people who have shared labor and are comfortable in each other's silences. Noah's wife would bring water to the workers in a clay jar wrapped in wet cloth to keep it cool. The sons, wives, tended the fire and the pots and the small children who played in the wood shavings and emerged at supper, covered in pale, curling slivers of cypress, smelling of the grove. The stars came out over the plain in the evenings, and Noah would sit at the edge of the growing work and look up at them for a while before sleep, as he had done since he was young. They had not changed, the same stars in the same patterns, turning slowly over the same hills. He found it steadying, that constancy. Whatever was coming, whatever great rain and long dark voyage the word had promised, the stars were already where they would be when it was over. He held that thought like a smooth stone in his hand and turned it over once or twice, and then he slept. So the days went on, soft and purposeful, the axe falling and the adzes shaping and the pitch darkening in the pot and the frame rising slowly from the plain, rib by rib and beam by beam, the great curved skeleton of what would become the ark. Noah and his sons and the one good man's family kept gently in the old story's palm, building their shelter before the rain, one day at a time. And the world around them went on as it always had, birds crossing the sky, flocks moving in the distance, the river turning gold at evening, not knowing yet what was coming. But the old man knew, and he was not afraid. He was only building. We turn now to a quiet word. It had come to him before the building had begun, before the first beam was cut or the first peg shaped, on an evening when the plain lay still and the last light was long and golden across the grass. Noah had been walking as he often walked, alone at the edge of the field, listening to the distant sound of water moving over stones in a shallow creek, and then the stillness deepened, and something spoke to him, not with a great voice, not with thunder, but with a nearness, like a thought that was not his own. The voice said, "The world has grown heavy with unkindness, and sorrow has gathered over it like rain before it falls." The world had lost its way, not in any single moment, not in any single place, but slowly, the way a garden loses itself to weeds when no one tends it, the way a clear stream grows clouded when the banks are broken and the soil falls in. There was a great weariness at the heart of things, and the old story says that something grieved over it, the way a person grieves who has loved something deeply and watched it come to harm. But there was one good man. The voice said this plainly, gently, one good man, and the old story said his name was Noah. He had walked honestly through his days. He had cared for the animals in his fields, tended the ground, kept faith with his family, spoken truth when he might have been silent. He was not a perfect man, as no man is, but he was gentle, and he was earnest, and he had not let go of the thing that matters. And so the voice came to him on the plain at evening, and it said, "I see you, old man, I know you." And then the word came, calm, unhurried, steady as a river running deep. It said, "There is a flood coming, not in cruelty, not in rage, but as rain comes when the sky is full, as a river rises when the snows melt far away in the high places. Something that had been held back a long time would be released, and the water would come, and the tired world would be washed." This is what the voice said quietly on the plain at evening, while the first star appeared low on the horizon, and the insects began their soft chorus in the grass. "But you will be kept safe," the voice said. And here the word changed its shape, from sorrow to instruction, from grieving to building. It said, "Make a shelter. Make it of strong, resinous cypress wood, the wood that does not rot, the wood that smells of resin and earth and deep forests. Seal it inside and out with dark pitch, the thick, dark tar that comes from the ground, so that no water can come in. Make it large. Make it with rooms for living and stalls for the animals, and a roof over all of it to keep out the rain. Make it a great wooden shelter," the voice said. "A hull big enough to hold your family, big enough to hold the animals that will come to you, 2 by 2, every living kind that walks and creeps and nests. A single door in the side and a single window above, and rooms enough for all of them. Seal the seams with pitch until not a thread of water can find its way through." The measurements came, patient, exact, and the old story has kept them, though what matters is not the numbers but the shape of the thing. A great safe house for living creatures, to carry them through what was coming. Noah stood on the plain in the last of the evening light, and he listened to every word. The grass bent slightly in the breeze. The creek went on murmuring over its stones. The sky above him was enormous and open, and he was a small figure beneath it. One old man, standing quietly in a field, being given a task that no one had ever been given before. And he did not argue. He did not ask why him or why now, or whether he was equal to it. He simply listened, and then, when the word had finished, he was still for a long moment in the silence. And then, here, once and lightly, the old story offers its gentlest assurance. Noah knew that the one who had spoken to him would watch over him. Not the watching of one who stands over and judges, but the watching of one who accompanies, who does not leave, who keeps a person in mind the way a shepherd keeps the flock in mind, even in the dark. Noah felt this without naming it. It was in the air around him like warmth, like the smell of the turned earth after rain. He breathed it in, and then he turned toward home, and the stars were coming out, and the plain was quiet. He told his family that night. They gathered in the low room of their home around the oil lamp whose wick burned with a steady honey-colored flame. His wife, his sons, 3 of them, Shem and Ham and Japheth and their wives. The lamp threw warm shadows on the mud brick walls. Outside, a night bird called once and fell silent. Noah spoke plainly, the way he spoke of all things, not in the voice of a man trying to persuade, but in the voice of a man who has heard something true and is simply passing it along. He told them what was coming. He told them what they would build. And so the task was given. The word had come and been received, and now it lived in them, in their hands, in their plans, in the conversations they would have the next morning around the fire. The ark was not yet anything but an idea, a shape held in the mind, a promise of shelter that did not yet exist. But the cypress forests were out there on the hillsides, full of tall trees that had been growing their whole long lives toward this moment. The pitch lay in the ground, dark and patient. The plain was wide enough. The task was large, and the family was small, and they would begin. In the days that followed, the plain at morning would smell of fresh-cut wood, a sharp, green, resinous smell, like the forest brought down into the open air. The adzes and the saws and the mallets were gathered and laid out in the order of work. Noah walked the perimeter of the place he had measured, dragging the line through the grass, marking the shape of the hull in the earth. A great outline appeared on the plain, larger than any building any of them had made, longer than a field, as wide as a good man's lifetime of careful work. The first beams were heavy. They smelled of sap and rain and deep shade, even out here in the open sun. Carrying them was slow work, work that required all of them, Noah and his sons moving together, lifting and carrying, setting the great timbers down in the places that had been prepared. Their feet were dusty. The sun moved across the sky. At midday, they rested in the shadow of the first laid beams and drank water from clay jars that had been kept cool in the earth. And the water tasted of minerals and cold, and the deep patience of the ground. The pitch came next, great dark jars of it, brought up from where it seeped from the earth in thick, slow pools. It was heated in clay pots over small fires, and it became liquid and black and fragrant, with a deep smoky smell that settled into the wood and the clothes and the hands of anyone who worked with it. They brushed it into the seams between the planks, slow, careful, thorough, covering every joint, every gap, every place where water might one day try to enter. This was patient work. The pitch dried to a dark, hard skin, and the wood beneath it became sealed and strong and quiet. The ark rose slowly from the plain. Day by day, the ribs went up, curved beams of cypress arching from the keel like the bones of some great sleeping creature, patient and strong. From a distance, the neighbors and the passers-by would stop and look, and then walk on, shaking their heads. They did not understand what they were seeing. A building with no walls of earth, no columns, no courtyard. A wooden thing, enormous, sealed with pitch, rising out of the grass like something dreamed. But Noah did not try to explain it to them. He simply built, one beam at a time, one day at a time. The rooms took shape inside the hull, spaces divided by plain wooden walls, stalls for animals, lower decks for storing the things that would be needed. Grain in woven baskets, dried figs and lentils in sealed clay jars, sacks of seeds, coils of rope, tools wrapped in oiled cloth. Noah and his wife moved through the half-finished interior, planning and adjusting, their feet on the bare wooden floor, the smell of pitch and new wood all around them. It felt, in those moments, less like building a vessel and more like arranging a household, making sure there was a place for everyone and everything they would need. The roof was the last great task. It was fitted with care, sealed planks laid over the curved frame, pitched and repitched until not a seam was open, so that when the rain came, the rain would run off and away and the inside would stay dry and warm. Noah climbed up and stood on the roof in the early morning and looked out over the plain. And the plain was wide and still and green, and the flocks were moving in the distance. And the birds crossed the pale sky in long, wavering lines. He stood up there for a moment, an old man on a great roof, and the wind moved through his hair and he breathed. The door was set in the side of the ark, a single great door of heavy cypress wood, thick and strong, with room enough for the animals to pass through 2 by 2. It was set in its frame with care, the hinge posts sunk deep into the wood of the hull. When they swung it open, the light came in a broad band, warm and golden. When they swung it shut, the inside of the ark was dim and close and smelled of new wood and pitch, and the air inside held a different quality. Quiet, enclosed, safe. Noah stood inside and looked at the door from within, and something settled in him. The window, too, a single opening near the top of the hull where light and air could come in, and where, when the time came, a bird might be sent out and might return. It was a small opening in so large a structure, no bigger than a man could lean through, but enough. Light came through it at certain hours and lay in a long, pale rectangle on the wooden floor below, moving with the sun, a gentle clock measuring the hours of the day. Everything that needed to be in the ark was now accounted for: a door, a window, rooms within rooms, the whole great sealed shelter of it, patient on the plain. And so the ark was finished. Not with fanfare, not with ceremony, just finished, the way a thing is finished when the last piece is placed and the work is done. The plain around it was covered in chips of cypress wood and dried drips of pitch and the traces of many months of labor. The ark itself stood enormous and dark and sealed, a great wooden shelter on the grass, patient, ready. Noah walked around it one evening as the light went gold, running his hand along the side. The wood was warm from the sun. It smelled of resin and pitch and all the days of work. He stood before the door and looked at what had been made, and he was not afraid. He was only ready. But let us go back before the sealing, before the final walk in the golden light. Let us sit a while in the long years of the building itself, the patient years, the unhurried years, when the work was still ahead, and the mornings came one by one like gifts. We begin at the beginning of it. The first morning, Noah took up his adze and walked out to the stand of tall cypress trees at the edge of the plain, where the resin ran like slow amber down the dark trunks, and the air smelled of something ancient and clean. The trees were old and straight, grown tall over many seasons, their crowns narrow against the wide, pale sky. Noah stood among them and listened to the wind moving through the high branches, a soft, steady sound like breathing. Then he set the adze to the first trunk, and the work began. The chip of wood flesh that fell was white and wet with sap, and it lay in the dry grass and gave off its clean, sharp smell. One tree, then another. The plain was very quiet around the sound of the work. His sons came with him in those first days, and then every day after. They learned the weight of a long saw, the way a green beam would split evenly if the grain was read rightly, the patience required to let the adze do its work without forcing. The felled trunks lay along the ground in rows, pale and enormous, waiting to be shaped. Sawdust drifted in the morning air when the breeze came from the east, and it settled on their robes and in their beards and smelled of something deep and sweetly particular, the inside of a tree, offered up to the light. The first great timbers to be shaped were the ones that would lie at the very bottom, the keel beams, the bones of the floor. They were the longest, the heaviest, and they took the most care. Noah and his sons dragged them on log rollers across the flattened ground, pulling with rope twisted from plant fiber, their feet pressing into the soft earth. When a great beam settled into its final position and lay still, there was a particular satisfaction in the sound of it. A low, settled thud, the thud of something finding its place. Then came the ribs. These were the curved timbers that would rise up from the keel and arch outward and up, giving the hull its great rounded shape. They had to be cut from the natural bends of the tree, the places where a trunk turned, or a limb met the trunk at just the right angle, holding the curve already inside the wood. Noah would walk through the cut timber and look along the grain of each piece with a slow, careful eye, the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand without words, until he found the right one. The ribs rose slowly. One by one, they were lifted into place, and the plain had never seen such a shape before. This great cage of curved wood standing against the open sky, the ribs spaced evenly like the arches of something enormous breathing out. From a distance, across the grass, a person could see the structure rising and not know quite what to make of it, only that it was large and patient and serious, and that the men who raised each rib did so carefully, with wooden wedges and rope and long, steady effort, and without hurry. The dark pitch came in clay pots, brought from a distance, warm and thick and richly black. They would heat it over a small fire at the edge of the work ground until it softened and thinned just enough to be worked with a wooden paddle, and then carry it steaming to the hull in the cool of the morning before the day grew too warm. The smell of hot pitch was strong and resinous and mineral, and it would settle into everything, into the wood and the rope and their clothes and their hands, and stay there for days, a deep, dark signature of the work. The planks that clad the ribs were cut thinner, long flat boards, still heavy, still dense with resin. A son would hold a plank against the rib, while another drove the wooden peg home with the mallet, and the knock of wood on wood rang out across the plain with a clean, hollow sound that the birds sometimes answered from the far trees. Peg after peg, plank after plank, the hull grew solid. Where there had been open sky between the ribs, now there was wood, close-fitted, tight, the grain running in long, parallel lines, sealed as it went with the hot, dark pitch along every seam. The mallet was a simple thing, a cylinder of dense hardwood, worn smooth where the hand had held it across 1,000 days. Noah had shaped it himself in the first weeks. It had a good sound and a good weight, and when he swung it, truly the peg would sink in one motion, clean and certain. There is a particular satisfaction in work like that. Work with a good tool and sound wood and a clear purpose. And the old man felt it every day, even in the hottest part of the day, when the pitch grew soft and the sawdust clung to the sweat on his arms. The seasons moved around the work. There were rains in winter that softened the ground and drove them inside their simple dwelling to sharpen tools and weave rope and rest. There were summers when the pitch dried almost before it could be spread, and they learned to work only in the early hours, in the blue-gray coolness before sunrise, when the air was still and the plain lay quiet, and the stars were just going out one by one above the rising hull of the ark. Those early mornings had a hush about them that felt like something larger than silence, like a held breath. Inside the hull, the work turned inward. Once the outer shell was rising and the great sealed belly of the ark could be entered, Noah and his sons began to build the world inside, the stalls and the rooms and the passages. They measured out the long lower deck with lengths of knotted rope, marking where each partition would stand. The interior was vast and dim, smelling powerfully of raw wood and pitch, the sound of a mallet in there traveling the full length of the hull in a low, warm echo, as if the ark were already beginning to know the sound of itself. The stalls were built from the same cypress wood, shorter planks this time, fitted between upright posts, spaced widely enough that an ox could turn, a sheep could lie. Each stall had a bed of packed earth and a rack for fodder, and the sons built them row by row along the lower level, working from the bow toward the stern in a slow and orderly progression that gave the work a kind of rhythm. By the time a stall was finished, it already smelled faintly of the animals that had not yet come, of earth and dry grain and the old patience of living creatures. Then the ladders, plain rungs of cypress rod, lashed with rope between two long side pieces, running from the lower level to the upper. Noah cut each rung himself, stripping the bark and smoothing the round surface with a rough stone until the wood was clean and pale, pleasant to grip. He tested each ladder by climbing it slowly, feeling each rung take his weight, listening for any sound that did not belong. The upper level was open and bright compared to the lower. Light came in from the gaps at the roof's edge, and from there the whole interior could be seen, stretching away into a warm amber dimness. High on the side of the hull, positioned with care, was the single window, an opening a cubit wide just below the roofline, fitted with a simple frame of cypress to keep it square. It let in a bar of light that moved across the interior through the day as the sun crossed. In the morning, it lay gold on the eastern wall, and by afternoon it had shifted to fall across the planking of the upper deck like a long, bright thread. On still days, small notes of dust and wood shaving drifted through it in the light, turning slowly, unbothered, as if the air inside the ark were already at rest. The great door was made last. It was set into the side of the hull, broad and tall, taller than a man, wide enough for creatures larger than a man to pass through, and it was built from the thickest planks of the whole ark, planks stacked and pegged together until the door was solid through, dense and heavy. The frame around it was fitted with precision, the edges sealed with pitch, so that when it was closed, it would close truly, holding the inside in and the outside out. Noah and his sons hung it together one slow morning, testing the fit and the swing in silence. The roof came together over the long middle section like the closing of two hands. Pairs of roof beams stretched from side to side, seated in notches cut along the top strakes, and over them the sheathing planks were laid close and pitched until no sky showed between them. The pitch was thick up there in the afternoon heat, running slow and warm, and where it dripped between the planks it hung in long amber drops before falling. When the last plank was seated and pitched and the sons climbed down, the interior of the ark was for the first time fully enclosed. Warm, dim, smelling richly of wood and tar, with only the window bar of light to remind it of the sky. And so the years turned through the work, and the work was the years. The sons grew stronger and more practiced. Their hands knew the tools as an extension of intention now. Noah grew slower and more deliberate, moving around the hull each morning with the calm authority of someone who had learned to let time be what it was. Not an enemy, not a thing to outrun, but the very medium in which careful work was done. The plain around the ark had changed over those years. The grass was shorter there, worn by the passage of many feet, and wood shavings lay in a wide, pale drift that the wind sometimes lifted and scattered like snow. Inside, a single oil lamp was lit for the first time toward the end of the building, when the roof was sealed and the interior had grown too dark to work in without light. Noah carried it in himself, a plain clay lamp, a wick of twisted linen, a small reservoir of oil, and set it on a wooden ledge near the center of the upper deck. The flame was small and steady in the still air, and it threw a warm circle of gold onto the timber walls around it, and set long shadows moving slowly in the ribs above. The lamp burned for the rest of the building and after. There came a day, not heralded, not marked, just a day like the others, when Noah set down his adze and looked around and understood that the work was finished. The seams were sealed, the stalls were standing, the ladders were hung, the door was fitted, the window was framed, the roof was tight. He walked the full interior slowly, from the bow to the stern, trailing one hand along the planked wall, feeling the solidity of it. Wood and pitch and wooden peg and wood again, all of it holding together, all of it ready. A great wooden shelter stood on the plain, and a long patience had brought it here. And then, before the sky changed, before a single cloud gathered on the horizon, something began to move across the plain. It came from the hills first, a small stirring in the long grass, a shape emerging from the tree line, and then another beside it, paired, unhurried, walking as though they had always known the way. The air was still warm, the light still golden and late, and the animals came on quietly toward the great wooden hull that stood waiting in the field. From the far meadows they came, the sheep moving in pairs, their fleeces catching the last amber of the afternoon, their hooves soft on the dry earth. From the rocky hillsides came the goats, sure-footed and calm, picking their way down the slope without any hurry, one beside the other, their bells silent for once. The whole plain hushed as though it were holding its breath. Even the birds in the field did not scatter. Everything was very still, and the animals moved through the stillness like a long, slow river finding its way home. From the woodland edges and the hollow places in the earth they came, creatures of the dusk and the deep forest, creatures seldom seen together, each pair moving with a quiet that seemed almost chosen. The old man stood at the door of the ark and watched them come, and there was nothing frightened in their bearing, nothing frantic or wild. They walked as though guided by something older than instinct, something beneath the hush of the evening air, and they came steadily toward the great shelter of cypress beams and sealed wood. The doves came early, settling first in pairs onto the broad timber rail of the great door, their feathers the color of pale smoke, their eyes soft and dark. They tilted their heads once, as though listening to something, and then they walked with small stepping feet along the wooden beam and into the dim interior, finding their way to the upper level where the light came through the framed window in a long slant, their wings folded quietly. They tucked their heads and rested, the first living things inside the finished ark, and the cedar-scented air settled around them. We move now closer to the door as the procession continues, for there is something very gentle and very old in this part of the story. The picture of all the creatures of the earth coming quietly to the place prepared for them. The ravens came next, their glossy black feathers catching the last copper of the light, landing with easy grace on the ark's great timber frame before stepping inside, unhurried, solemn. After them came the smaller birds, pairs of them, wings folded, feet gripping the smooth-worn ladder rungs as they climbed to their perches in the upper chambers. The sons of Noah had been at work since the first light of that morning, carrying the provisions aboard. Great woven baskets of grain hoisted up through the door, sacks of dried seeds and pressed figs, clay jars of water sealed with cloth and cord, sheaves of straw bundled and carried on their backs up the wooden ramp. The straw smelled of summer still, dry and warm, and they laid it thick in the stalls, shaking it loose so it fell in soft golden drifts across the planked floor, making each small wooden room a bed ready for whoever would come. Sacks of grain were stacked along the inner wall, their coarse weave rough to the touch, the smell of millet and barley rising clean and faintly sweet in the enclosed air. Coils of plain rope hung from wooden pegs. Clay jars were nested in beds of straw, so they would not tip with the rolling of a wave, though no one yet knew how a wave would feel, how the world below the hull would move. For now, there was only the good weight of provision, the quiet satisfaction of a larder filled, the sense of a long journey already half prepared. And still the animals came. The oxen were broad and patient, their great heads low, their breath warm in the cooling evening air. 2 by 2 they walked up the wooden ramp, their hooves solid on the planking, and Noah's sons guided them gently with open palms at their flanks, speaking low words that were more sound than language, a soft, steady murmur that seemed to calm even the largest creatures. The oxen entered their stalls without hesitation, turned once, and stood. The straw shifted under their hooves and rose fragrant around them. The goats were led into the stall beside the sheep, and the sheep pressed together in their gentle way, flank against flank, their breathing slow and warm. One of the wives of Noah's sons hung a small oil lamp from an iron hook above the row of stalls, and the light it cast was amber and soft, rocking faintly with the movement of the air. And in that swaying light the animals seemed already settled, already at ease, as though the straw and the wooden walls and the low warm glow were as familiar to them as any field or pen they had ever known. From the wild places farther off, other creatures came, creatures of the brushland and the river margin, creatures that in the ordinary turning of days would not have walked so openly across a plain. Yet here they were, paired and unhurried, their wildness held in check by something the evening could not name, moving steadily through the dry grass toward the great hull that smelled of resin and pitch. They entered the lower stalls one by one, and Noah or one of his sons latched the wooden gate behind each pair, a soft wooden sound, a settling, and then quiet. Deeper into the evening, the procession continued, unhurried, patient, and the ark grew slowly warm and full. Below the main floor, the heavy provisions were stored, jars and sacks and baskets wedged secure, and on the floor above, the stalls ran in long rows on either side of a central passage, just wide enough for a man to walk between them, trailing a hand along the wooden rails, checking each latch and each small lamp. The air was thick now with the smell of clean straw and warm animal, and the faint sweet resin of the cypress walls, and it was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of a barn in the best part of autumn. Noah walked the passage slowly, as he had walked it the evening before and the one before that, measuring with his hands, listening with his whole body for the sounds the wood made. The timbers were quiet. The pegs were holding. The pitch-sealed joints were smooth and dry to the touch. In the stall nearest the great door, a pair of young cattle had already lain down in the straw, their sides rising and falling in long, slow rhythm, their eyes half closed. He stood beside them a moment, one hand resting on the warm planked partition, and felt the steadiness of the thing he had built. On the upper level, where the framed window let in what remained of the evening sky, a narrow band of deep blue going slowly to gray, the birds had gathered in ones and twos on the wooden crossbeams and the wide shelved ledges. Doves rested with their wings folded. Ravens sat motionless, their black eyes bright in the lamplight. Other birds that had come from the thickets and the reed beds settled in their pairs along the timber, and the sound they made was very small, a faint murmuring, almost like breathing, the quietest music in the world. His wife had brought aboard the last of the household things, her grinding stone wrapped in cloth, a bundle of dried herbs tied with cord, the small clay bowl she had used for 30 years to mix oil and grain for the morning bread. She set these in the low wooden shelf that had been fitted along the wall of their own small chamber at the ark's center, and when they were arranged to her liking, she sat for a moment on the edge of the wooden sleeping place and listened to the sound around her. Animals breathing, straw rustling, the faint creak of seasoned timber in the cool of the night. Outside, the plain was very dark now, and the stars were beginning, or would have been beginning, in another year, another evening. But on this night there was a heaviness in the air that had not been there before, a closeness, a stillness without wind, and the smell of the earth itself had changed, gone cool and mineral and deep, the way soil smells before a long rain. The last pair of animals, two slow-footed creatures from the far marshes, walked up the wooden ramp in the darkness and passed inside, and the ark received them without fuss, as it had received every creature that had come. And then, quietly, it was complete. Every stall held its pair, every basket of grain was wedged and stowed, every lamp had been trimmed and lit. The ark smelled of pitch and cypress and the warm, soft breath of many creatures at rest. And from somewhere in the middle of the lower deck there came the slow sound of an ox shifting its weight in the straw, settling deeper, and the straw gave softly beneath it. And after that there was only the great enclosed quiet of many breathing things in a lamplit wooden house, and the sense, very gentle, very certain, of shelter made complete. Noah's sons sat together for a while on the planked floor of the central passage, their backs against the stall rails, their legs stretched before them. They had carried and climbed and latched and loaded since first light, and their shoulders were heavy with the pleasant weight of work finished. One of them reached up and touched the wooden peg above him, testing it without thinking, the way a builder does, checking what has already been checked. It held. It had always held. They sat in the lamplight with the warm animal dark around them, and no one said much, because there was nothing left to say. The work was done. The old man came and sat among them, and his wife brought water in a plain clay cup, and he drank. The water was cool and tasted faintly of the sealed jar it had been kept in. clay and stone and the long patience of deep wells. A dove on the crossbeam above them rustled its wings once and then was still again. One of the lamps wavered, its small flame bowing in some breath of air too faint to feel, and then it steadied, and the light was warm again on the cypress planks, and the faces of the family seated together in the middle of the great wooden ark, waiting. Outside, the wind had dropped entirely. The plain lay without sound, and deep in the sky above, though no eye on the earth could see it yet, the great weight of water was gathering, slowly, patiently, as the ark had been built slowly and patiently, and the earth itself was very quiet in the last hour before the rain began. Inside the ark, a sheep breathed, a dove tucked its beak beneath its wing, a lamp burned low and steady, and the family of Noah sat together in the warm lamplit dark of a great wooden shelter, and they were all of them safe, and the night held them gently, and nothing was wanting. The morning came softly, a pale and silver light spreading across the plain without drama, without fanfare, only the slow brightening of a sky that had grown heavy and low overnight. The clouds settled in thick and gray from horizon to horizon, and the air carrying the particular stillness that comes before a long rain. Noah rose early. He moved through the ark with a small lamp, checking the lashings on the stall gates, pressing his palm flat against the great beams, feeling the solid warmth of the cypress wood beneath his hand. Outside, the plain lay silent. There were no birds calling. The grasses stood still in air too heavy to stir, and the distant hills had disappeared entirely into the low gray ceiling of cloud. It was as though the world itself had paused, holding its breath in the last quiet hour before everything would change. Noah stood at the top of the broad ramp and looked out at the familiar plain one final time. The scattered trees he had passed 1,000 mornings, the low ridge of hills beyond them, the smell of damp earth already rising. Then came the sound of his family, the soft tread of feet on packed earth, voices low and unhurried, the rustle of cloth and the dull weight of bundles shifting from arm to arm. His wife came first, carrying a woven basket of dried herbs and folded linen, her steps steady and sure on the ramp. She did not look back at the plain. She walked forward into the warm shadow of the ark's open door, and the smell of straw and cypress and warm lamp oil rose around her like an embrace. His sons came behind her, one by one, each carrying what the hands of a careful household carry when a long journey begins: sacks of grain, clay jars sealed with wax, coils of plain rope, folded skins, the small tools of daily life. Their wives came with them, each woman bearing her own bundle, and the ramp creaked gently under the weight of all of them together, a sound like the ark itself breathing in and drawing them near. The great door stood open still, and through it poured the last of the gray outside air. Inside, the animals were quiet in their stalls. An ox stood with its great head low, breathing slow and warm in the straw. A pair of pigeons rustled briefly on their perch, and then settled, folding into themselves. The rams and ewes leaned together in the near dark, and somewhere in the deeper pens a camel shifted its weight from one foot to another, with a sound like a slow tide, and then was still. The smell of hay and grain and animal warmth was thick and sweet and entirely alive, and the lamplight made everything the color of honey. Noah's family set down their bundles in the space made for them, the baskets tucked into corners, the clay jars nested carefully between two beams where they would not roll, the sacks of grain stacked flat and steady. His wife hung a sprig of dried herbs from a wooden peg, the small domestic gesture of a woman who knows how to make a shelter into a home. The sons moved through the stalls one last time, checking the water troughs, pressing fresh hay into the mangers, speaking softly to the animals in the way that men who have cared for animals since childhood will always speak. A word came, quiet, clear, as the old story tells it, a word that had no thunder in it, only the certainty of shelter freely given. Come in, and come in now. Noah heard it the way one hears something already known, the way the palm of the hand knows the wood it has shaped for years. And he gathered himself, and he turned from the great open door, and he walked into the heart of the ark, and the warmth of it closed around him like a cupped hand around a flame in a night wind, steady and sure. Then the great door began to close. It moved slowly, as something that has been made with great care and great weight always moves, not with a bang, not with haste, but with the deep, measured inevitability of a thing fulfilling its purpose. From inside, the family watched the band of gray daylight narrow. The pale oblong of the outside world, the flat plain, the heavy sky, the last standing grasses, grew thinner and thinner, drawing itself like a slow breath toward a seam of pale silver at the edge of the frame. The seam of gray narrowed to a line. The line narrowed to the finest thread of pale light, no wider than a blade of grass, and then it was gone. The door was shut. From outside came the sound of the great pitch-sealed timbers settling against the jamb, a long, low, final sound like the last note of a song, and then nothing but the warm, closed dark of the interior, and the amber breath of the oil lamps, and the animals quiet in their stalls, and the family standing together in the sealed and sheltering ark, and they were shut safely in. The great wooden door was sealed with pitch against the coming rain, the dark tar filling every joint and seam until there was no gap and no cold place anywhere in the hull, and the whole ark was one warm and seamless shelter from roof to keel. Whatever lay outside now lay outside. Whatever would come on the water and not find its way in. The one who had set this journey in motion, who had spoken to the old man in the quiet of an ordinary morning long ago, was watching over the ark still. The first raindrop fell on the roof of the ark. It came alone, a single soft tap, so quiet that only a family sitting in absolute stillness would have heard it. Then another, and another, each one a small, unhurried announcement, the way the first notes of a long and patient song arrive before the melody takes hold. The family stood together and listened. There was nothing frightening in the sound. It was rain on a wooden roof, and they were dry, and the lamps burned warm, and the straw was deep and sweet beneath their feet. The rain grew. It filled in from scattered drops to a steady, soft percussion, a sound like a river passing overhead, and the whole great roof of the ark became one continuous murmur, every plank and beam adding its particular note to the whole, until the sound was no longer individual drops but a living thing, a presence, a comfort. A child falling asleep under such a sound would sleep deeply, and the family of Noah sat together in the warm lamplit dark and let the sounds settle over them like a blanket drawn softly up. In their stalls the animals were untroubled by the rain. The oxen breathed their slow, deep breath. A ewe lay down in her straw with a soft exhalation, folding her legs beneath her with the particular grace of a creature entirely at ease. 2 doves sat wing to wing on their perch, their small bodies warm against each other. The raven was still, its dark eye half closed, its feathers smooth and neat. Even the great beasts in their deeper pens had settled into the rhythm of their own breath, and the whole ark was one long, slow exhalation together. Noah moved among the stalls with his small lamp, as he had moved every evening for all the long months of building. But now there was no building left to do, no beam to check, no pitch seam to tend. There was only the walking and the warmth, and the animals steady in their places, and the rain on the roof growing softer now, finding its own long rhythm. He set the lamp on a shelf near the stalls and stood for a moment with his hand resting on the neck of a sleeping ox, and felt the slow pulse there, and it was good. His wife had spread their bedding in the space they had made for themselves. Folded skins and woven cloth laid flat on the straw, a second lamp burning low on the beam overhead, a sprig of dried lavender tucked near the pillow for the smell of it. It was, in its way, not so different from any other night. Two old people settling into their rest while the rain fell outside, while the world went quiet around them. She had folded her hands and closed her eyes before he returned, and her breathing was already slow and even. The rain went on through the evening and into the deep of the night, and somewhere in the long quiet hours the great ark stirred. It was not a lurch, not a shock, only a long, slow breath of movement, the barest shift of weight, as if the hull had sighed and lifted its feet from the plain at last. The water had come, gentle as it had been promised, and it was lifting the ark, slowly, carefully, the way strong hands lift something precious, and the ark rose and steadied and floated and was carried. Inside, no one woke. The motion was too gentle, a slow rocking, the way a cradle rocks in a careful hand, the way a boat on still water rocks when a breath of air passes. The animals slept on, the lamps burned on, the rain went on falling on the roof, a soft and ceaseless percussion, and the ark moved on the dark water, unhurried, held. Noah lay in the dark with his eyes open for a little while, listening to the rain and the breathing of his family and the breathing of the animals, and he felt the rocking beneath him, and he was not afraid. The rain fell, the water rose, and the ark floated on in the dark, as steady and sure as it had been built. Slowly, patiently, beam by beam, peg by peg, seam by sealed seam. Outside, the world was water and rain-gray sky, and nothing else to see for miles. But inside there was warm straw and steady lamplight and the slow breath of sleeping animals and the family of one good and gentle man, resting together in a great sheltering ark that held them as the night holds a candle flame, close and careful and entirely without harm. And so we come to rest here, at the end of this long sheltering evening, sealed safely in, the rain on the roof, a lullaby that never falters, the lamps burning low, the animals warm and still, the family breathing together in the dark. Let this be the sound that carries the night now, not the rain outside, but the safety within. The wood, the warmth, the wide and quiet dark of a good shelter in a long and gentle night. Rest here. The ark is holding. The rain is only rain. And the morning, when it comes, will come gently. The rain had been falling for a long time now, and no one aboard could have said exactly when the counting of days had blurred into something softer. A rhythm, a tide of sound, a low and steady breathing that belonged as much to the world as to the sleepers in the stalls. The lamp at the far end of the lower deck had burned down to a smaller flame, and in its amber light the straw gleamed like old gold, and the oxen stood with their great heads bowed, and the darkness between the wooden ribs was warm and still. Above their heads, through the thick planks of the cypress roof, the rain went on, not in gusts or fury, but in that steady, unhurried way that rain has when it means to stay a while. It found the grain of the wood and ran along it, speaking quietly to each beam, each peg, each sealed joint that Noah's hands had fitted together in the long months of building. The pitch held. The seams were tight. The sound it made was less like weather and more like a lullaby, played by someone who had no intention of stopping. Noah sat near the lamp with his wife beside him, her shoulder against his shoulder, both of them quiet in the way of people who have been together so long that silence has become its own kind of conversation. One of his sons moved through the stalls at the far end of the deck, checking the water troughs, his lamp a small traveling star in the dark. A goat lifted its head and watched him pass, then set its chin back on the rail of its stall and closed its eyes. The rain spoke steadily above them all. There was a quality to the air inside the ark that is difficult to name, warm and close, smelling of cedar resin and straw and the clean breath of animals, a little of lamp smoke, a little of the wet wood that had absorbed the rain's moisture through the weeks. It was the smell of the inside of a very old barn on a rainy afternoon, multiplied and deepened, made into something almost ceremonial by the sheer number of living creatures breathing in the dark. Each breath added to it. Each sleeping animal contributed a small and steady warmth. The ark had been rocking for so many days now that the motion had become indistinguishable from stillness. The way travelers carried on a long, slow current sometimes forget they are moving and feel only a long, slow swaying that their bodies have accepted as the ordinary shape of the world. It rocked with great gentleness, a cradle motion, side to side and fore and aft, in a soft and shallow arc. The water below them never rough, never urgent, only immense and wide and patient. The wooden frame creaked once and settled and was quiet again. A pair of doves sat on a high beam near the window. The small square of light cut into the upper wall that let in what pale gray sky the clouds permitted. They were tucked together, one head beneath one wing, the other watching the interior with a single bright and untroubled eye. Now and then one of them would shift its weight, and the soft sound of feathers settling was almost inaudible beneath the rain. The window beyond them showed nothing but a flat gray luminance, the light of a world made entirely of water and cloud. The elephants on the lower deck, great and dark and still as boulders, had not moved in many hours. Their breathing was the deepest sound in all the ark, slow and resonant, a sound felt as much as heard, a vibration that passed through the floor planks and into the soles of one's feet. Around them, the smaller animals had arranged themselves in the comfortable proximity of creatures who have accepted one another over long days of shared shelter. The sheep against the partition, the deer with their legs folded beneath them, the cats curled in the straw as though the whole world had always been this warm room. Somewhere in the middle of the days, the old story does not count them here, and perhaps that is right. Noah climbed the ladder to the upper level and stood near the small window and looked out. There was nothing to see but gray water in every direction, flat and wide and very still between the falls of rain, no horizon he could name, no shore, no hill, no tree. Only the water and the rain coming down into it, and the ark on the water, and the lamp behind him casting a small, warm light onto the wet wood of the window frame. He stood there for a while, listening to the rain on the roof just above his head, so close here, the planks only a hand's breadth overhead, and it occurred to him, as it may occur to anyone kept safe inside on a rainy night, that the rain itself was not frightening. It was the sound of water doing what water does. It was the sound of the world being held in something larger than itself. He placed his hand on the window frame and felt the faint vibration of it. The rain's steady work. And then he turned and went back down the ladder to where the lamp was burning. His wife had set out clay bowls of dried lentils and oil for the evening, and the family gathered around the lamp as they had gathered every evening since the door had closed. Quietly, without ceremony, the 6 of them in the warm amber ring of the lamp's light. They ate slowly, the rain filling the silence above them so completely that there was no need for talk. One of the sons set a hand on his wife's hand, and they sat that way for a while, and the lamp threw their shadows large and soft against the curved wooden wall. After the meal, one by one, they lay down in their places, on the woven mats they had carried aboard, beneath the woolen blankets that held the smell of home, and the lamp was turned low but not out, because a lamp left burning low through the night is a kind of company. The rain was still there. It had not changed. It would not change tonight. But it was not a frightening sound from inside. It was the sound of the roof doing its work, the sound of the pitch holding, the sound of every peg and beam and joint saying quietly, "I am here, I am holding, rest." And we move a little deeper into the night, past the hour when even Noah's family had settled into the long, slow breathing of sleep, into the quiet that belongs only to the animals and the rain. The horses stood in their stalls with their eyes half closed, their lower lips loose and soft. The smaller birds had tucked themselves into the corners of their cages, compact and warm. The raven, black and still as a burnt branch, sat on a high peg near the hatch, watching nothing, or watching everything in the way ravens do. The rain came down and came down. It had a texture to it now, in the deep part of the night, not heavier but denser somehow, as though the sky above the clouds was pressing gently against them, and the rain was the sky's slow exhale. On the roof, it made a sound like a river heard at a distance, steady and sourceless, coming from everywhere at once. Inside, the warmth of so many breathing bodies had made the air thick and soft, and the lamplight barely reached the far walls now, and the stalls were pools of warm shadow, and everything was at rest. Beneath the hull, far below, the water moved in slow and invisible currents, but the ark did not feel them. It rode above them the way a leaf rides above the deep part of a river, carried without effort, without striving, without any intention of its own. The wood was old now in the water, had drunk in what moisture it could through the pitch-sealed grain, and it floated with a settled permanence, as though it had always been here, as though this wide gray sea had always been its home, and the rain its familiar companion. The ark simply was, and rested, and was carried. Inside, a lamb had woken, very young, born just before the door had closed, so that all it had ever known of the world was this: the warm stall, the smell of straw and resin, the sound of rain above, the lamp at the far end of the deck. It stood on unsteady legs for a moment, blinking, and then folded itself back down against its mother's flank, and the ewe curved her neck around it without fully waking, and the two of them settled together into the straw, and the lamp burned on. There is a particular quality of safety that belongs only to shelter in a storm, not the absence of the storm, but its presence felt from the other side of something solid. The rain was real, the water below was real, and the ark was real too. Every beam cut and fitted by real hands, every joint sealed with care in the long months of patient work. It had been built for this, and now it was doing what it was built to do, which is the quietest kind of rightness there is. A thing fulfilling its purpose in the dark, without show, without witness, only the rain and the warmth and the wood. The lamp at the far end burned its oil slowly, as a good lamp does, not rushing toward darkness, but spending itself with patience. Its light reached the nearest stalls, made amber the flanks of the sleeping oxen, caught the glint of a clay water jar, and the pale curve of a coil of rope hanging on a wooden peg. The upper deck was entirely dark, and the lower deck was mostly dark, and the rain above was steady and soft as a hand held gently over the whole of the ark. And beneath that hand everything rested, the animals, the family, the wood itself. And so the rain went on, as it had, as it would, patient and unhurrying, pressing its soft weight against the roof, running along the beams, gathering at the joins and running off, never finding a way in. The ark held. The ark had always held. And inside, in the warmth and the half-dark, the world that mattered, the small, breathing, sleeping world that had been gathered and kept, went on resting. The sound of the rain was the border of that world, the edge where safety lived, the line between the wet dark outside and the warm dark within. And the warm dark within was very good. And if you were to listen from very far away, from somewhere above the rain, above the clouds, above even the gray and patient sky, you might hear it, a small warm sound rising up through all that water and air, the quiet sound of many living things breathing together in the dark. The animals in their stalls, the family on their mats, the lamp burning low, the rain on the roof, the ark on the water, a shelter, holding, a world, sleeping. And the one who had set all of this in motion was not far, though the story holds that presence gently, like a lamp turned low but never out. Morning came as it had the morning before, and the one before that, Not with any fanfare, only a slow brightening behind the clouds, a gray softening of the darkness that seeped through the little window set high in the wooden wall. The ark drifted on. Below, the animals stirred first, as animals always do, shifting in their straw, breathing out long, warm breaths that rose and mingled with the smell of cedar and pitch and the faint sweetness of hay. Noah rose quietly in the dimness, lifted the lamp from its hook, and began his rounds. He moved through the long lower deck, unhurried, pausing at each stall, touching a flank here, murmuring a low word there. The oxen stood patient and warm, their great sides rising and falling. The sheep had curled against one another in the night, and were only now beginning to uncurl, blinking slow. A pair of doves sat huddled on a wooden perch above their basket, heads tucked under wings, each a small gray comma of sleep. The morning round was a kind of prayer without words, attentive and steady, the work of a man who had always moved gently through the world. His sons worked alongside him, each knowing his portion of the deck, each with his own path among the stalls. The rhythms had settled quickly, as rhythms do when people share a small space and a common purpose. Grain was measured from clay jars into wooden troughs. Water was poured from sealed vessels. There was the quiet sound of an animal eating, a steady, patient grinding, and the softer sound of water taken in long, slow draughts. Outside, the rain had eased overnight to a fine mist, and the ark moved with a very small rocking, side to side, almost imperceptible, almost like breathing. By midday, the light through the window was its fullest. Still gray, still soft, the light of a sky that had forgotten blue for a while and learned only cloud. But it was light enough. It fell across the wet wooden planks in a thin, pale bar, and the dust motes and chaff that drifted in the ark's warm air moved through that bar slowly, turning, unhurried, as though time itself had slowed to match the drift of the vessel on the wide, still water. The family moved through that light without urgency. There was nowhere to go. There was only here, and it was enough. The water outside was vast and very quiet. If one pressed close to the hull and listened, there was a sound, not loud, barely a sound at all, of the water sliding along the cypress wood, a low, continuous murmur, the way a river speaks in its shallows when it thinks no one is listening. The pitch that sealed the timbers held it perfectly. Not a drop came through. The wood was dark and fragrant where it had absorbed the oil of the pitch, and the inner walls of the ark carried that smell always, a deep resinous warmth, like a forest in late summer after a long rain. There were afternoons when the rain stopped entirely, and in that stopping the silence was remarkable. A new silence, fuller than the rain silence, because it was the silence of the world itself, which had become only water and cloud and the small wooden vessel moving through both. In those intervals of stillness, Noah would climb to the window and look out. The water stretched in every direction, without a shore, without a hill, without any edge at all, only the slow roll of its surface under the low, pale sky. It was strange and it was beautiful, in the way that very large and very quiet things often are. Evenings were the warmest hour. The work of the day was done, the animals fed and settled, the water vessels refilled, the straw freshened where it needed it. The family gathered in the upper space near the central lamp, and there was food. Flatbread baked on a small clay hearth, dried figs, lentils soft from long soaking, oil poured into a shallow dish for dipping. The smell of it rose with the lamp smoke in a gentle column, warm and ordinary, the smell of any family at supper anywhere in the ancient world. Outside, the ark rocked. Inside, the bread passed from hand to hand. The nights were the deepest rest of all. When the lamp was turned low and the family lay down on their mats, the sound of the ark was all around them like a song without melody. The creak of the wooden joints as the hull flexed slightly with the water, the low breathing of the animals below, the soft percussion of rain beginning again on the great wooden roof, and under it all, the foundational sound of water, everywhere, and quiet, holding the ark, the way a cupped hand holds something small and precious. Sleep came easily in that sound. It always did. The days accumulated like layers of sediment, quiet, undramatic, each one resting gently on the one before. There was a particular quality to that kind of time, time that does not press forward but simply continues, that is known to sailors and hermits and those who have ever kept a long vigil through the night. It is not empty time. It is time that empties itself of urgency and fills with something simpler and harder to name. Attention, perhaps, or a kind of radical patience, the patience of water itself, which has no plan but to be where it is and let things be carried. Among the animals there were small dramas of their own kind. A young goat restless in its pen, pacing the short length of its stall until Noah's wife came and sat beside it quietly, her hand on its neck, until it stilled. A pair of large birds, unsettled by the dark below deck, ruffling and calling low until one of the sons moved their perch higher, closer to the window light. These were not crises. They were the ordinary negotiations of creatures living in close quarters, asking in their own languages for what they needed, and being gently answered. The ark was very full of need and very full of tending. There were mornings when the clouds thinned enough that a different quality of light came through the window. Not quite sunlight, but the memory of sunlight, a warm, diffuse glow that touched the interior of the ark and made the straw shine faintly gold, and made the animal's eyes soft and liquid and beautiful. On those mornings everything seemed closer to ordinary, closer to the world as it had been before the rains. The smell of wet wood and clean air drifted in. Somewhere in the middle distance of those moments it was possible to feel without strain that the world was not lost, only resting. Noah spent part of each day at simple work, not the great labor of building, which was finished and behind him, but the small maintenance that a living vessel requires. A wooden pin that had worked loose in the rocking was tapped back into place with a mallet. A rope frayed at its loop was unraveled a little and reknotted. Straw was raked. A water jar was repacked in its rope cradle so it would not shift in the night. It was the work of keeping, which is different from the work of making, quieter, slower, less dramatic, and perhaps equally important. He moved through it all without haste. The dove that was among the birds of the ark had grown accustomed to its place, to the warmth of the interior, to the voices of the family moving below. It sat in the particular stillness that doves have, not asleep, but utterly still, feathers smooth and close, eyes half-lidded, head barely moving with each breath. There was something about a dove at rest that made the space around it quieter. It was as though the bird carried stillness inside it the way a lamp carries light, not making it exactly, but holding it and letting it radiate outward, very gently, into whatever room it happened to be in. The water outside remained very calm. The great early rains that had lifted the ark were long past now, and the flood had spread itself wide and become a kind of ocean, not turbulent, not stormy, but still and gray and utterly wide. The ark did not need to go anywhere. It simply was, floating in the middle of all that stillness, a small warm world within the larger world of water, rocking almost imperceptibly when the water shifted under some distant and unhurried wind. The hull was darkened with wet and with pitch, and it reflected in the water below it in a long, wavering, dark shape, like a shadow of itself. His wife kept her own careful rhythms. She knew where every provision was stored, how much of each remained, how long it needed to last. She moved through the ark's stores the way a gardener moves through a garden, with knowledge and with care, adjusting quietly, redistributing weight, noting what was needed and making it last. She had packed dried herbs in small cloth parcels and hung them from the low beams, and on certain days the ark smelled faintly of thyme and dried rosemary, a smell so ordinary and so particular to home that it must have steadied something deep in all of them, without a word being said. There were long hours in the middle of certain days when the ark was perfectly quiet, everyone resting, the animals dozing in their straw, the rain gone for a while, the water smooth. In those hours, the only sounds were the very small ones, the creak of a rope shifting in its loop, the deep, almost inaudible groan of the hull settling in the water, a single animal turning in its sleep. It was a quiet so complete it had texture, the way good wool has texture, warm and close and slightly rough at the edges, the kind of quiet that presses gently at the edges of things and asks nothing in return. Somewhere in the long middle of those 40 days and the days that followed the rain, time stopped marking itself by the outside world and began marking itself by the inside world instead, by meals and rounds and the settling of animals, by the lamp's need for oil, by the slow wearing of sandals on the wooden deck. These were the true measures of the days now. Not the sun, which was hidden, not the stars, which were hidden, but the grain in the jars and the oil in the lamp, and the mats smoothed each morning and unrolled each night. The ordinary things had become the whole world, and the whole world was enough. And still the ark drifted, and still the water held it. The days were a kind of gift, though they would not have been called that. They were simply what was, the continuation of the shelter, the ongoing fact of the roof and the walls and the warmth within. The rain came and went and came again, always soft now, a long, patient rain that did not rush. The animals breathed in their stalls, the lamp burned through the nights, and Noah would lie down in the dark and feel the water rocking under him, distant, constant, patient, and it was the steadiest thing he had ever felt beneath him, that great slow rocking, that kept and ceaseless motion. Let the drifting be enough for now. The warmth within the great wooden walls, the animals settled into their knowing sleep, the family at rest on their mats, the lamp a low gold eye in the dark. The water is very wide and very still. The rain falls soft on the roof. The ark holds. All of this is held. And somewhere, beyond the clouds and beyond the wide water, something patient and unhurried is waiting. Not with urgency, but the way morning waits, the way spring waits, quietly certain that its time will come. Then one morning, the sound changed. Not suddenly. There was no sudden thing in those long, quiet days, but the rain on the roof grew lighter. The steady drumming softened to a murmur, and the murmur softened further still, until it was barely a whisper of water against the wood. The family stirred on their mats. A goat lifted its head in the stall. The old man lay still and listened, his eyes open in the dim, his breath slow and wondering, as the sound he had fallen asleep to every night for weeks and weeks at last grew thin and faded and was gone. The silence was enormous. It settled over the ark the way a blanket settles over a sleeping child, gently, completely, without edges. The animals felt it first, the way animals always do. The sheep shifted in their straw, the doves on their high beam ruffled their feathers and then stilled. Even the oxen stood quietly, their great dark eyes turned upward as though they too were listening for something that was no longer there. The rain had stopped. After so many days and so many nights, the rain had simply quietly stopped. The hush that followed was the deepest thing any of them had ever heard. Then the wind came, a warm wind, not fierce, not howling, nothing like that, but a gentle, steady breathing that moved across the face of the wide water and touched the sides of the ark and set it rocking in a slow, easy way, like a cradle finding its rhythm again. The old man felt it through the hull, felt the slight new motion, and something in him loosened, some tightness he had held so long he had forgotten he was holding it. He pressed his palm flat against the cypress planks and felt the warmth there, the warmth of wood that had been sealed and trusted and had held, and the water began, very slowly, to go down. It did not rush. It had no hurry in it. It was the same patient, unhurried thing that had been working all along, only now it worked in the other direction, drawing back, retreating, lowering itself by measures so small that a single day showed almost nothing. But day after day showed something. The family would mark it. A line on the hull, a notch in a beam, and each morning the notch would be a little higher above the water than it was the morning before. The world was returning. Not quickly, but truly. The sky was changing too. The long, unbroken gray that had sat over everything for so many weeks was beginning to thin, to separate. There were places in it now where the light came through differently, not as a break, not as a beam, but as a general brightening, a pale, luminous warmth spreading through the clouds the way warmth spreads through cold hands held near a lamp. The old man watched it through the small high window, the single square of sky he had known for all those weeks. Each day it was a slightly different color of gray, and some days toward evening it was almost white. The family moved through these days with a different kind of quietness than before. The long rain had been the quietness of waiting, of holding still inside something vast and uncertain. This new quietness was different. It was the quietness of watching, of leaning forward slightly, of a hope that did not dare speak its own name yet but was there nonetheless, warm and tentative, like a small fire just caught. His wife hummed softly while she measured out the grain. His sons moved through the stalls with lighter steps. The animals ate more readily. Something had shifted in the air below decks, and everyone aboard the ark could feel it. We move with the old man now to the end of a long, slow day, many weeks after the rain had ceased. He was sitting near the small window in the last of the pale evening light, watching the water. And he noticed, and he had to look twice to be sure, that far off, at the very edge of what he could see, something dark was rising above the surface of the water. It was not the water itself. It was not a cloud. It was something solid. Something that had been beneath the water for a very long time was coming back up through it, like a memory returning slowly to the surface of a still pool. Mountaintops, dark and ancient and washed perfectly clean, their upper slopes still carrying the last of the snow, their lower ridges green in that deep, muted way that stone and moss are green after long rain. They rose above the water slowly over many days, a little more each morning. First just the peaks, dark points against the pale sky, then the shoulders of the ridges, then the long descending slopes. The world was remembering its own shape. The old man called to his family, and they came and looked through the window together, and for a long time none of them said anything at all. The light kept changing. Each morning it came to the window a little warmer, a little more defined, the pale, diffuse glow giving way by slow degrees to something with a direction, something that fell at an angle and made shadows again. Shadows. They had almost forgotten shadows. Inside the ark, the shapes of the beams and the stalls had been swallowed in the flat lamplight for so many weeks that seeing a real shadow on the wall, cast by the window in the morning sun, felt like a kind of gift. The old man held his hand up in the light and watched the shadow of his fingers fall across the planks, and he was still for a long time. And then the ark moved differently. All this time it had moved as things move on water, that gentle, yielding, weightless motion, never quite still, never quite settled. But one morning, very early, when the sky outside the window had just begun to show its first pale color, there was a different feeling beneath them. A slowness, a heaviness, a sense of the hull meeting something that was not water. And then a sound, low and long and unhurried, a sound like a great sigh drawn from the wood itself, as the ark touched the ground. It settled slowly, the way a tired traveler settles into a chair after a very long road, not collapsing, not landing hard, but easing down with a final grateful weight. The timbers spoke as it came to rest. Small sounds, the creaking of wood finding its position on solid ground after so many weeks of floating free. The animals shifted in their stalls with the slight new tilt of the deck. A clay jar rolled a little in its rope cradle and stilled. The lamp swung once on its hook and steadied. And then the ark was still, truly still, the stillness of something that has arrived. They were resting on the high mountains. The old man knelt on the deck and pressed his forehead to the planks and stayed there a long moment. Beneath the wood he could feel, or he imagined he could feel, the solidity of the mountain beneath them, the ancient, patient stone that had been there long before the rain and would be there long after, waiting for exactly this moment when the world would be new enough to receive it again. The cypress beams and the dark pitch had done what they were built to do. They had held, through all of it, through all those days and nights of rain and water and long floating dark, the ark had held. He stayed there on the deck a good while, his forehead on the wood, listening to the silence. Outside, through the window, the air smelled different. Even from inside the ark, they could catch it, a freshness, a cleanness, the smell of stone and wet earth, and the faint green bite of moss and lichen, and things just beginning to grow again in the washed, aired-out world. It was different from the smell of rain, which they knew very well by now. Rain smells of water falling through air. This was the smell of water leaving, of earth breathing out, of soil opening after long saturation, of green things uncurling at their roots in the dark. The world smelled like beginning. The water continued its slow retreat, day by day, the way the tide goes out on a flat shore, not dramatically, but steadily, dependably, a little more each morning. The mountaintops that had appeared as dark points on the horizon grew taller, showed more of themselves, revealed their lower ridges and the long curves of their valleys. The world was doing what worlds do after long rains. It was draining, drying, resettling into itself. The old man would go to the window each morning and look out at the water below and see where the line had fallen in the night. And each morning the line was lower, and each morning the mountains were a little more themselves. Below decks, the days had their own slow rhythm still. The animals needed feeding and watering and tending, and the sons moved through the stalls with the easy, practiced calm of men who had done this work for a very long time now. The straw needed changing. The water jars needed refilling from the stores. The bread needed baking on the small clay hearth. Life inside the ark went on in its plain, dependable way, even as life outside was slowly reasserting itself across the face of the world. There was something good in that. Something steadying about plain work continuing, while the larger world found its way back to itself. The pale light that had seemed so thin and uncertain in those first days after the rain stopped was deepening now, growing more golden, more confident. There were whole mornings where the window showed a sky of genuine pale blue, not much, not the rich blue of a summer noon, but a clear, clean, washed blue that made the old man stand at the window longer than he meant to. Blue sky. He had not known how much he missed it until he saw it again. There is a kind of gladness the eyes feel at a color they have been denied for a long time. He stood there with the light on his face and let himself feel it. The ark sat on the high mountains, patient and still, as the world below it slowly remembered itself. From above, from the high place where the peaks were bare and the air was clean and cold, you would have seen it as a small, dark shape resting on the stone, a great roofed hull of cypress and pitch settled into the mountain's shoulder, the way a sleeping bird tucks into a crevice for the night. Small and safe up there in the heights. And below it, the water still wide and calm and pale in the morning light, but lower each day, lower and lower, the world drawing it back like a cloth drawn slowly back to reveal a table set and waiting. And the old man rested. He rested as a man rests who has done something very large and very long, and has come at last to the end of the hardest part. Not idle. There was never an idle hour aboard the ark, but his body was settling. His shoulders were lower. The furrow between his brows had eased. His wife brought him a cup of water and sat beside him, and they looked out the window together without needing to speak. The water below catching the pale gold of the late afternoon, the dark shoulders of the mountains growing more defined each day, the world coming back, slowly and certainly, like the return of a song whose words you thought you had forgotten but had been keeping somewhere quiet all along. This is where they rest tonight, held in the high mountains, the ark settled and still, the rain long over, the great water drawing back day by patient day. The world outside is quiet and washed and slowly returning to itself, and the ark holds its warmth and its breath and its lamp glow above it all, resting on the solid stone. The long rain is over. Solid ground is beneath them again, and the world is coming back. It is coming back surely and gently, and it will be new. Rest here a little while, in the stillness of the mountain and the last of the pale evening light, in the quiet certainty of something that has held and held well and is resting now at last. We wait now with them for the world to dry. The ark rests on the high mountain like a sleeping creature, its great cypress beams settling into the stone with soft creaks and sighs. Inside, the morning comes quietly, a thin line of gray light pressing through the gaps in the planking, and the smell of straw and warm animal breath, and the low sound of the family stirring. Noah rises in the early stillness and moves through the wooden hull, his sandalled feet soft on the planks, toward the small window he had set high in the ark's side. The window is a modest thing, a square of rough-hewn cedar fitted into the ark's upper wall, no wider than a man's outstretched arms, latched with a simple wooden peg. Noah works the peg free with careful fingers. The wood has swollen from all the long weeks of rain, and it gives slowly, then at last swings open, and the cool mountain air comes in, clean and sharp and carrying the scent of wet stone and something green and living far below. He breathes it in. After so many weeks of sealed, close warmth, the coolness on his face is gentle and startling. He looks out. Below and in every direction, the water still lies vast and gray and quiet. A great still sea reaching to the horizon in all directions, the color of polished pewter in the morning light. Here and there, the dark tops of other high places break the surface like the backs of sleeping animals, their stone skins still glistening with moisture. The world is not yet ready. The water has not yet gone down enough, but it is lower than it was. Noah can see that clearly. The line of the water on the nearer peaks has shifted, and the stone shows a little more. He reaches into the wooden cage nearby, a simple affair of woven withies and cypress slats, and draws out the raven. It is a large bird, blue-black as a storm cloud, its feathers iridescent even in the dim interior light. It is alert and restless, gripping his wrist with strong curved talons, turning its head one way and the other. Noah holds it to the open window. The air moves the raven's feathers. Then, with the quiet economy of a bird that knows its own power, it opens its great wings and lifts from his hand and out into the open sky. The raven does not go far, and it does not go long in one direction. It flies out over the water in great wheeling arcs, its black form cutting the pale sky, and then it swings back and circles near, and then goes out again, restless, purposeful, finding nothing to settle on, finding no dry land. Noah watches it from the open window for a long time. The raven is tireless and strong, and seems neither distressed nor lost. It flies as ravens fly, with absolute dark competence, to and fro over the face of the wide water, and it does not come back to the ark to stay. Noah watches until the raven is a small black comma in the distance, and then draws back from the window. He is not dismayed. He has waited 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and then all the long weeks of stillness on the water, and then the days of resting on the mountain. A little more waiting is nothing to him now. He moves back through the hull with the same quiet step, checking the animals in their stalls. A hand rested briefly on the flank of a goat, the soft sound of grain poured from a clay jar, the rustle of fresh straw laid in a corner where the young ones have been sleeping. Then he returns to the cage of woven withies and looks in at the dove. She is small and pale, the gray-white of old linen, and she sits very quietly on her perch of twisted willow, watching him with round amber eyes. She is a gentler creature than the raven, a softer one. Noah works the little latch of the cage and cups her in both hands, and she allows it, folding her wings flat against his palms with a whisper of feathers. He carries her to the window. Outside, the great gray water shines. He opens his hands, and she is gone. She goes smaller over the water. Noah watches her from the window, the soft rhythmic beat of her wings, the white of her body catching what little light the sky holds, growing smaller and smaller over the gray expanse. She flies in a widening circle, then a wider one, tilting and turning, searching the water's surface for anything solid and dry where her small feet might rest. But there is nothing. The water is everywhere still, unbroken, and the floating debris of the old world gives no purchase for a dove. She finds nothing. She turns back. He is still at the window when she comes back. She comes quickly in the end, as if she knows where warmth is, her wings beating faster as she nears the ark. And Noah puts out his hand through the open window, and she lands on it. Lands on his outstretched fingers with the lightness of a breath, her small claws barely pressing the skin of his palm. He draws her in, slowly, carefully, his hand curled gently around her warm, soft body, and brings her through the window into the sheltered interior. The warmth of her, the small, rapid heartbeat under his thumb. He sets her back gently in the cage and latches it. He waits 7 days, 7 quiet days in the ark on the mountain, with the world outside slowly doing its slow, invisible work of drying and uncovering, and the family inside doing the small daily works that fill time in a closed place. Mending a piece of harness with a bone needle, grinding grain between smooth stones, carrying water in clay jars to the animals, telling quiet stories in the evenings by lamplight. The children of his sons sleep tangled together in the straw. The oil lamp burns through the nights. Outside, the water goes down day by slow day, and more of the mountain shows. On the morning of the 7th day, Noah rises again before the others and goes to the window and opens it. The air is colder now, and he can smell something different in it, something green and living that was not there before, faint as a rumor, but real. He goes to the woven cage and opens the latch. He cups the dove again in both hands. She is warm and quick-hearted and trusts him entirely now, and carries her to the open window and opens his hands, and she is gone into the morning. He watches her go. He watches until she is too small to see, and then he waits. The day passes. It passes in the way the days have passed. The animals fed and watered, the lamp trimmed, the planks of the floor swept with a bundle of twigs bound together for a broom. His wife brings him bread at midday, flat and warm from the small clay brazier they keep burning below. He eats slowly, watching the square of sky through the open window. The light in it changes through the hours, gray to pale gold to gray again as thin cloud passes. No dove. The light softens toward evening, still no dove. And then the quality of the air changes, just slightly, just at the edge of perception. It is the soft of the evening. That hour when the light turns amber and the shadows go long and the world grows very still before the dark comes down. Noah is at the window. And then there she is, a small pale shape coming out of the amber air, her wings working with a different quality than before. Not the quick, urgent wing beats of a bird returning with nothing. Something slower, more deliberate, as if she is carrying something and knows its value. She grows larger. She is coming back to him. She is coming back to him with something in her beak. She lands on his hand, and he draws her in, and then he sees it. A small, fresh sprig of olive, the leaves still bright and green and alive, a little bruised from her careful beak, smelling faintly of green sap and something clean and growing. He holds it in the lamplight and looks at it for a long time. It is such a small thing, 2 or 3 tiny leaves on a slender twig, no longer than his little finger. But it is the most beautiful thing he has seen in many weeks. It means the olive trees are showing again. It means the water has gone down far enough for the treetops to clear. Noah sits down. He sits down on the wooden bench along the ark's inner wall, with the dove on his knee and the little olive sprig between his fingers, and he is very still and very quiet. His wife comes to him, and he shows her the leaf, and she takes it from him and turns it in the lamplight and says nothing, and he says nothing either for a little while. There are no words large enough for what a small green leaf can hold. The family gathers, and the leaf passes from hand to hand, sons and daughters-in-law and children, each holding it briefly in the lamplight, each understanding. He puts the dove back gently in her cage. He places the olive sprig in a clay cup with a little water, as one would keep a flower, so that the green of it will last a little longer. And then he closes the window against the cooling night and settles the family to rest, and the lamp burns low, and the ark rests still and solid on the high mountain, and outside the stars come out one by one over a world that is slowly, steadily, patiently becoming itself again. The water is going down, the trees are coming back. It is enough. It is more than enough. He sleeps well that night. 7 more days pass. 7 more days of the slow, patient world, of the water receding, of the mountain showing more of itself each morning, of the animals moving in their stalls with a restlessness that feels different from before, something that knows open ground is coming. On the morning of the 7th day, Noah goes once more to the woven cage, and he lifts the dove with the same care as every other time. But this time he pauses before the window, looking at her small, serious face, her amber eyes steady on his. There is something in the pause, a recognition perhaps, a thanks. Then he opens his hands. She rises from his palms in a clean arc, her wings catching the morning air, and she goes out over the water, which is lower now, noticeably lower, the tops of hills and the crowns of trees breaking through in places, patches of dark, wet earth showing, a whole changed and softened landscape beginning to declare itself beneath the retreating gray. The dove flies out and grows small. She turns once, and the light catches the white of her wing, and then she is gone, truly gone, not returning. Noah stays at the window a long time. She will not come back. She does not need to. He closes the window softly. The dove is gone into the new world, and that is good. That is what she was meant for, as the ark was meant for this, and the rain was meant for this, and the long waiting was meant for this. He rests his hand flat on the worn cypress planking of the window's frame, and the wood is smooth and warm under his palm from all the weeks and weeks of being touched and trusted. The world outside is drying. The dove is free in it, and the old man stands in the quiet of the great wooden ark, with the lamplight behind him and the morning ahead, and breathes. And then at last the word comes, the same quiet word that had set everything in motion so long ago, the word that had said build, that had said gather, that had said come in, and now it says go out, all of you. Go out onto the earth, go out and be alive in the new world that is waiting. Noah stands for a long moment in the stillness of the ark's interior, the lamplight warm at his back, the morning air cool and green through the open window, and he understands. It is time. The long sheltering is over, and the world is ready to receive them. He crosses the great floor of the ark one last time, past the empty stalls where the straw is pressed flat and golden, past the clay jars and the coiled rope and the woven baskets that have held grain for so many months. His sandals on the wooden planking make the same soft sound they have always made. He runs one hand along the smooth timber rib of the hull as he passes, the cypress wood still faintly fragrant beneath the familiar smell of pitch and animal and wood smoke. And he comes at last to the great door, the door that was sealed and shut against the rain, and he sets his hands to it. The great door swings open slowly, and the morning comes in all at once, a rush of clean, cold air, bright and green-smelling, and sharp with the scent of wet earth and moss and something flowering somewhere on the hillside. And Noah stands in the open doorway and blinks, just as his family had blinked from the window, just as any creature does when it steps from the dark into the wide and shining world. The light is extraordinary. After all those weeks of gray rainlight and warm lamp glow, the morning is so clear and white and enormous that he stands very still for a moment and simply receives it. His wife comes to stand beside him, and his sons and their wives behind them, and they all stand together in the bright doorway, breathing the new air in, the first true outside air in so many long months. And no one speaks for a little while. There is nothing to say that the morning has not already said. The hillside rolls away below them, wide and green and glittering with rain still caught in the grass, and the mountains rise in the distance, their high peaks soft with cloud, and the sky above all of it is the palest, cleanest blue that any of them have ever seen. And then the animals begin to come out, 2 by 2, as they had come in, though quieter now, less urgent, the long months of closeness having made them gentle and unhurried with one another. They come to the open door and step down onto the wet ramp and out onto the hillside. The sheep first, their fleeces damp with morning mist, nosing at the grass immediately, the smell of it perhaps more wonderful to them than anything the old story can say. Then the goats, light-footed on the wet slope, picking their way among the stones with their careful, particular steps. The cattle come next, slow and broad and unhurried, their breath rising in soft clouds in the cool morning air, their heavy hooves pressing deep into the soft, wet earth as they step down from the ramp. They scatter gently across the slope below the ark, lowering their great heads to the grass, and the sound of their quiet grazing is the most ordinary and beautiful sound, a sound that belongs to a living world, a world that has grass in it and morning and animals eating peacefully in the early light. Noah watches them go, and something in him that has been held very tight for a very long time begins to loosen. The wild creatures come after, the ones that had slept so long and so quietly in the deep stalls, the ones whose breathing had filled the ark's hold with a warm animal richness through all the months of rain. They come to the door and pause for a moment, reading the air with their noses and their keen ears, and then they go, quickly or slowly, each in its own way, out into the wide green world that is theirs again. They scatter up the hillside and along the ridges and into the tree line, becoming small and then smaller, and then only a movement in the new grass, and then nothing at all. The birds go last, or perhaps before. It is hard to say, for birds do not move in a line but in a sudden lifting, a rush of wings from the open door into the open sky, and then they are simply everywhere at once, the morning full of them. They rise in pairs from the great wooden hull and scatter into the pale blue air, their calls carrying clear across the wet hillside, sounds of life, ordinary and irreplaceable, the sounds a world makes when it is full of living things going about their living. The sky receives them, the branches of the hillside trees receive them, and the morning rings softly with all of it. And then Noah steps down, one foot and then the other, onto the wooden ramp, and then 1 foot down onto the earth itself, the actual ground of the new world, soft and soaked and yielding under his sandal, and he stops. The earth is cold and wet and wonderfully solid. He can feel the whole weight of himself resting on it, the ground receiving him steadily as it always had, as if nothing had changed, as if it had simply been waiting. He crouches down and presses both palms flat into the wet grass and the dark earth beneath, and the earth is cool against his skin and smells of rain and root and a deep green beginning. His family comes down behind him, and they stand together on the hillside in the clean morning air, the ark rising huge and dark and worn behind them, its cypress planking weathered by months of rain and sun, and the slow rocking of deep water, its hull still dark with pitch, its great door standing open to the morning. It looks smaller somehow, now that they are outside it, or perhaps the world looks larger. Perhaps both things are true at once. They stand on the wet grass and they breathe, and the air is cold and sweet and faintly mineral, the way the air is after a very long rain, when the earth has been thoroughly washed and the sky has cleared. The land spreads out around them, green and wide and washed utterly clean, every surface gleaming with the moisture of the long rain. The grasses on the hillside are vivid, the kind of green that only comes after a great quantity of water has passed through a place and left it new. Small rivulets still run down between the stones, the last of the rain finding its way downhill in thin, bright threads. The distant mountains stand clear against the morning sky, their upper slopes still dusted with white, their lower ridges dark with wet rock and the first returning green. It is a world that has been given back to itself, whole and unhurried and very still. Noah walks a little way down the hillside, away from the ark, away from his family, out into the open ground where the grass is long and the morning light falls full and clean. He is old, and his steps are careful on the wet slope, but he walks steadily, the earth firm beneath him after all. He finds a place where the ground levels out slightly, a small shelf of hillside with a clear view of the valley and the distant ranges, and there he stops. He looks out at all of it for a long time, the green valley, the pale sky, the mountains, the shine of water still standing in the low places far below, and he is very quiet inside himself. He begins to gather stones. This is what the old story says he does, and it is perhaps the most human thing in all of it. This old man on a wet hillside picking up stones one by one, the gray and brown and mossy stones of a newly washed mountain, turning them in his weathered hands and setting them one upon another in a rough and simple arrangement. No mortar, no shaping, no craft beyond the patient stacking of one stone on the next. He is building a small altar, the oldest kind, just stones, just the earth's own material, just a place to stand and acknowledge what has been given, what has been held, what has been kept safe through the long darkness of the rain. When the altar is built, a modest thing, not tall, the stones still damp and moss-speckled and imperfect, which is perhaps why they are right. He gathers a small armful of dry wood from the shelter of the ark's lower timbers, where the ramp had kept the ground dry, and he lays it carefully on the flat top stone. His hands are steady. He has done quiet work with his hands for most of his long life, and this is quiet work too, careful and unhurried. The same attention he gave to the fitting of a cypress beam or the smoothing of a dovetail joint in those long, patient years of building. Whatever the hands know how to do with love, they do now. A thin curl of smoke rises. That is all the old story needs to say about it, and it is all that will be said here. A thin curl of smoke rising from a small rough altar of unworked stones on a wet green hillside on the morning after the long rain. The smoke rises straight up at first in the still air, and then curves gently sideways as a breath of morning wind finds it, and then disperses into the pale, clean sky. Noah stands with his gray head bowed. There are no words recorded, no speech, no formula, only the old man and the smoke and the morning and the immense quiet that surrounds them. Some thanks do not have words. They are just a standing still, a bowing, a smoke. His family comes to stand with him after a time, not all at once, but one by one, quietly, the way people come when something is being held carefully, and they do not want to disturb it but cannot stay away. They stand in the morning beside the small altar and the thin smoke on the wet hillside, in the clean air, with the whole wide world spread out before them. The animals have scattered now. The cattle are already far down the slope, the sheep a pale drift against the green, the wild creatures long since taken to their woods and ridges, and the world is full of them again, full of living things going about their living. And this, too, is a kind of prayer. The smoke thins and disperses and is gone. The morning goes on, the light shifting as it always does, the long, slow pour of the sun across the wet hillside, drying the stones one by one, warming the earth, drawing the last of the rain moisture up from the grass in a faint silver haze that rises from the valley floor and dissolves into nothing. The world is very beautiful and very quiet. The ark stands above them on the high ground, its door still open, the morning light falling through it and onto the worn wooden floor within, illuminating the pressed straw and the empty stalls and the lamp that has burned low and is burning still, its small flame steady in the draught from the open door. Noah turns from the valley and looks back at the ark one long last time. It is worn and weathered and very plain, this great timber hull sealed with dark pitch, not beautiful in the way the morning is beautiful, not graceful in the way the dove was graceful, but solid and faithful and whole. It carried them. Through all the weeks of rain and all the weeks of waiting, it carried them, and it did not fail. He looks at it the way one looks at something that has been a home, with a gratitude that goes past words, past ceremony, past anything the old man knows how to say. And then he turns back to the morning, to the green world waiting, to his family beside him on the wet and shining hillside. And so they rest there on the green hillside in the first true morning of the new world, the family close together, the earth solid beneath them, the animals spread soft and free across the valley, the sky wide and pale and utterly clear. The long sheltering is complete. The rain is over and gone. The world is clean and new and full of morning, and the ones who were kept safe through the darkness of the water are standing in the light of it now, breathing it in, belonging to it again, whole. The thin smoke of the altar is long since gone. What remains is just the hillside, and the grass, and the family, and the quiet, and the extraordinary, ordinary brightness of a world beginning again. And then, as the family stood on the hillside in the soft morning light, something began to move through the clearing sky. Not a sound, not a wind, only a slow, gentle brightening at the eastern edge of the clouds, where the gray was thinning to silver, and the silver was warming to gold, and the gold was opening, the way a hand opens when it has been holding something precious a long time and is ready, at last, to show what it carries. The colors came slowly. They always come slowly when they come to stay. First a thread of rose, faint as the inside of a shell, arching from one edge of the sky to the other across the wide, calm water. Then, beside it, violet. Then the deep, warm amber of the sun still low on the horizon. Then green, the same green as the leaves on the olive branch, the same green as the hillside drying in the morning air, and the soft, wet grass underfoot. It was a rainbow, a great soft rainbow, arching all the way across the sky above the water, from one quiet hillside to the other, its colors reflected in the surface of the calm, still lake that the world had become, doubled, trembling gently, as though the earth itself were cradling the light back toward the sky. The family stood and looked at it, and no one spoke. There are things too full for speaking. This was one of them. And there came, as the rainbow held its arc across the morning, a word that was felt more than heard, the way a warmth is felt when someone you trust is near, even before they speak. A word of peace, of promise, that such a flood would not come again to cover the earth, that the seasons would turn on gently now as they always had, seed time and harvest, cold and warmth, summer and winter, day and night. These would not cease. The old man heard it, and something in him that had been held very tightly for a very long time, through the long months of building, through the gathering of every creature, through the night the rain began and the dark weeks adrift on the deep water, something in him let go. Not because the danger had passed, though it had, but because the promise was gentle, and the one who had watched over the ark had kept them, and would keep the world gently now. The rainbow stayed a long while, long enough for each of them to look their fill, and then to look again. The colors did not flash or flare. They simply were, patient and wide and full of a quietness that the sky does not often hold. Below them, the water caught the light and gave it back. Around them, the wet earth smelled of rain and roots and the first green things already beginning to reach again toward the sun. The old story says the rainbow was set in the cloud as a sign, not a warning, but a reminder, a gentle mark in the sky that would come again whenever rain gathered over the world, a sign of peace kept between the heavens and the earth, to be seen by every creature walking the ground and every bird carried on the air, a sign for all the generations that would come after, long after the mountain was just a mountain again, and the ark was just a memory carried in the mouth. The long rain is over now, and somewhere far below the high mountain, in the deep places where the water is still drawing back, the seeds that fell when the rains began are waiting. Somewhere in the soft mud at the river's edge, a reed is growing. Somewhere in the shelter of a rock, a small animal is curled and warm. The world is not empty. It is resting, the way a field rests after its hardest season, gathering itself for what comes next. Somewhere on the hillside below the mountain, a dove has found a branch to rest on. She sits very still in the soft morning light, her gray feathers smooth, a small green leaf just visible at her feet. She does not look up at the rainbow. She does not need to. She already knows what it says. She came back through the rain with it in her beak, and she laid it down, and it was enough. It was always enough. Rest, now. The dove is at rest. And the great ark rests on the high mountain, its hull dark with pitch and weathered by the long weeks at sea, its wooden ribs still holding true, its great door standing open to the clean air. The grass around it is already growing back where the animals walked out 2 by 2 into the morning. A thin mist moves along the mountain's flank below it. The ark is quiet now. It has done what it was built to do. It is enough. A wet, green, new-washed world. That is what remains when the long story settles into its last quiet moments. Sunlight on standing water, the smell of earth that has drunk its fill and is warm again. Distant mountains still faint with mist, their peaks just catching the first clear light of a morning that has no memory of darkness in it. Only this, only brightness, only the extraordinary stillness of a world that has been held safe and set back down, gently, whole. The day moves toward its close. The rainbow has long since faded as rainbows do, leaving only the clean blue of a sky washed through. The family has found shelter. The animals have gone, each to its own way, carrying the world forward in their quiet bodies. And now the evening comes, the first true evening of the new world, and the first stars appear, soft and unhurried, one by one, the way they have always come, the way they will always come. Still, faithful, near. The long rain is over now. The world is washed and green. The ark is at rest on the mountain. And inside it, in the deep quiet of the wooden hull, where the straw is still warm and the air smells of cedar and the breath of animals sleeping, a single clay lamp burns low in the dark. Its flame is very small. It does not need to be large. It only needs to last until morning, and morning is already on its way. It is enough now to rest. And so the lamp burns low on the story of Noah. Thank you for resting with us tonight. Until our next story, Lullaby Atlas. Sleep well.